Hi everyone, welcome to this discussion of the elections dissad. I'm going to give a brief overview of what the elections dissad is, what utility it has. We'll talk a little bit about the elections dissad in the negative, and then the off arguments made against the elections dissad. So what is the elections dissad? Generally, the elections dissad is considered a type of politics dissad because it's about the way that the plan might impact external political factors that are happening in the world around us. It is useful because it's a net benefit to lots of agent counterplans. For example, on this topic, you'll have lots of debates about the state's counterplan, and the elections dissad is a net benefit to that. It also can avoid some of the pitfalls of a traditional agenda dissad. One of them is that because there's an election year, we have lots of deliberation happening in news articles and things like that about the election, but we do kind of have a lack of specific and significant bills that are being passed through Congress that we could write an agenda dissad about. It also avoids the traditional PC debate, which can be a debate that, especially in the era of Trump, is quite difficult to win for the negative. So the elections dissad has the same parts that any disadvantage usually has: the uniqueness, link, internal link, and impact. So for an elections dissad, the uniqueness argument is a claim made about which candidate is going to currently win the election. For example, you could say that Biden is currently going to beat Trump in the general election in November. There are a couple of things that you have to be concerned about for the elections dissad uniqueness. The first is uncertainty. So as with any politics dissad, you don't want it to be already decided what's going to happen. You don't want the large amount of literature to say a bill is already going to pass or a bill is definitely not going to pass. But the elections dissad, the version of that you have to worry about is whether or not people have already decided who they're going to vote for. So you need there to be some uncertainty built into your uniqueness claim. For example, you want to say Biden's going to win now, but it's unclear. There are lots of undecided voters. People are going to still be able to change their minds. The second big part of uniqueness for an elections dissad is predictability. This is about whether or not you can predict the result of an election ahead of time. This can get into kind of the theoretical discussion regarding polls and the way that people predict elections, and often requires that you defend things like polling, being able to make accurate predictions about who is going to win the election. This debate is especially big after the 2016 presidential election, in which a lot of big pollsters failed to successfully predict the outcome of the election. So this is something you will have to discuss often on the uniqueness debate on whether or not you can predict what's going to happen in an election and how people are going to vote. Next is the link debate. So the link debate has a couple of important components. The first one is, why does this issue matter? Is this something that the general public and the people who are deciding about how they're going to vote in November are going to care about? With criminal justice reform, we have a topic that is prevalent to public discourse in the current moment and is something that a lot of people are talking about and thinking about when they're deciding whether or not they like a candidate. So we're fortunate that we have a topic that a lot of people are going to care about. The second thing that you have to consider with the link debate is, why are people going to switch their votes in response to the policy or the issue that the affirmative discusses? So in order to win the link debate on the elections dissad, you have to win that people are going to change who they're voting for because of this single thing that they care about. That can be kind of hard sometimes because people obviously care about a lot of different issues. People have a lot of personal reasons that they prefer one candidate over the other. So you have to win that people are going to care so much about this specific issue and the action that the affirmative takes that they are willing to change who they're voting for in November. The next component of the internal link of the dissad is the internal link debate. This is, why does the result of the election matter? what is one person winning versus another going to cause? So you might say that if Trump wins, he's going to continue to be aggressive towards Russia and China. This is kind of intuitive. It's similar to other disadvantages. Why does the thing that the off causes to happen cause something bad? So I think that part is pretty common sense. The last part is the impact. Why is the thing that someone winning the election versus the other cause why is that bad? So why would Trump being more aggressive towards Russia or China be a bad thing? This is also kind of similar to other disadvantages and is fairly intuitive if you are familiar with most dissets. So now I'm going to look at the specific elections dissad that was put out in the starter packet that you all have access to, and we're going to talk about this one a little bit. So this is the one in C. It follows all of the parts that I've just talked about. So for the first part, we've got the uniqueness. Trump is losing to Biden now, but it's close. This is a pretty good example of the uniqueness conundrum that I discussed. It makes a claim about who's winning. It says Biden continues to lead, but it also says that there are lots of voters who haven't decided where they're going to vote and who they're going to vote for. So this establishes, someone's winning, but there's still chance for things to change. Next is the link argument. So this card is saying that Trump cares a lot about criminal justice reform. He's talking about it a lot in his election, but that he hasn't done a lot to demonstrate to voters that he is going to fix the injustices that have happened previously in the criminal justice system. It says things like he could do much more and he'll have to do more than just to play the hits once a year. So this all kind of sets up the argument that Trump cares about the criminal justice reform. He's talking about it in his campaign, but he needs to do something concrete to back it up for voters to care. The next card is another link card. This card specifically preempts an affirmative argument that Trump has already done something that could be perceived in the same way as the affirmative. So it's talking about the First Step Act, which was a piece of legislation passed that was criminal justice reform. And it says that this step, while it created a focus on criminal justice reform in the election, is just incremental. It's not a big enough step to demonstrate to people who are deciding how they're going to vote what Trump would change in terms of the criminal justice system. It also makes some good arguments about how important it is to the electorate. There's this paragraph in the middle that talks about how polling shows that people care about it and how people think that it needs to be reformed. The end talks about how there needs to be a substantive policy platform and that it's an issue voters care about. So this is a pretty great piece of link evidence in that it preempts an affirmative argument, makes an argument for why voters care, for why they would switch their vote, and demonstrates that voters are thinking about this issue. Then you get to put in your impact scenario. So the file has quite a few of them down towards the bottom. There's laundry list impact, which is the impact we're going to be using for the drill that we're doing. We're going to assume you read this card that just says, what's going to happen if Trump wins a second term. It has a bunch of different impacts: climate change, accidental nuclear war, proliferation. So that's a good kind of broad impact. This impact talks about how the 2020 election is crucial to demonstrating U.S. Leadership abroad. This is about our alliances, how Trump will destroy them in the second term. This is a more specific climate change impact. This is about Trump letting New START expire, which is a cool, specific scenario that can avoid some of the first administration Trump should have caused something, because it's obviously something he couldn't really do in the first administration. An impact about the Iran deal, and then some turns case arguments about how if Biden were to win, he would do the affirmative. There's some more specific ones over here on the headers on the left. And then the rest of the decide's kind of all up in here. There's the uniqueness, answers to things like we can't figure out how people are going to vote now. We can't predict elections ever. Polls aren't going to be helpful. There are other things that people care about in the election. So that's kind of just a general rundown of what's going on in this file. So on the other side, there are affirmative arguments for what's kind of happening with the disadvantage. So in the same way that there are the 4 parts about the decide you're going to discuss, there are the 4 parts of the decide that you're going to discuss on the affirmative. So we've got the uniqueness debate. So if the negative is saying that Biden is going to win now, you can say the opposite. Actually, Trump is winning now. And so even if the plan is good for Trump, it doesn't matter because he is already going to win the election in the status quo. You can say that it's not uncertain, that actually voters have already decided who they're going to vote for. They don't care about the plan, so and they're not going to pay attention because they've already decided. You know, there are big personal reasons you might not want to vote for Trump. People are already kind of, you know, picking sides based on their party. Trump has already done so much in the past several years that people don't need to see more of what he has to offer to decide whether or not they want to vote for him. The last argument is kind of this predictions argument that we talked about, which is we can't predict what's going to happen. Polls have failed in the past. They're not going to successfully demonstrate to us who is going to win or how people are going to vote. Maybe something else is going to happen between now and the election. A black swan is kind of what we call that, an event that we don't know about now that is going to happen and make things worse. The next kind of thing are grouped under the link debate. So the first thing is just the issue doesn't matter. You can say voters don't care about criminal justice reform. Voters care about other stuff. They care about Trump's personality. They care about the things he's done over the past 3 years. They care about their party affiliation. This kind of jives well with the votes are locked in argument because it's about how voters, you know, have already decided based on something else. The second argument you can make is something else matters to voters more. So something that you'll see in the app arguments that are in the starter packet is arguments about the coronavirus. Voters care a lot about how Trump is responding to the coronavirus and what Democrats say that they would do about the coronavirus. Obviously, this issue is present in everyone's mind. It's something everyone is thinking about, and they might just care more about what happens in response to the coronavirus than they do about what happens in regards to criminal justice reform. Another argument is that it won't cause vote switching. So people might care about criminal justice reform, and they might even care about the plan, but they don't care enough to change who they're voting for. The combination of sort of all of these things that we've already talked about, the coronavirus, party affiliation, things like that, are going to override whether or not people actually care about criminal justice reform, and they're just going to vote about that. The next argument is that something already happened that encompasses the effect of the app. So this is one that I kind of talked about in the 1NC when we were looking at it, and the 1NC kind of preempts. So someone might say, Trump already helped pass a criminal justice reform bill. He already did first step. They might say that that demonstrates to voters what Trump is going to do with criminal justice reform, and therefore the plan doesn't change the narrative or make it kind of any different. The third category is the internal link. So this is pretty straightforward. You can just say the elected candidate isn't going to do the thing that they are accusing them of doing. Trump is not going to be any more aggressive to Russia or China than he already is. He is not going to cause more climate change. He is not going to pull out of New START. Lastly is the impact. The thing that might happen that is bad just doesn't matter. This is kind of the traditional impact defense you might be familiar with reading. So Russia or China war won't escalate, climate change doesn't cause extinction, New START expiration doesn't cause war. Things like that are our traditional defensive arguments that you have considered.